The concept of zero was a turning point in history that revolutionized math, astronomy, science, and countless other areas. Many ancient civilizations came up with the concept of zero. These forms may have looked different, but all functioned similarly. Over time, this concept spread and changed, and eventually became extremely important to civilization, commerce, and architecture as it evolved through the centuries.
Mathematics has been around for thousands of years, and humans use it in millions of ways. Humans use math and numbers to understand the world around them. Math is applicable to almost everything from architecture to art. Math has fundamentally changed the way we think about the world. Without math, it would be impossible to calculate large sums such as how much money we have and how many people live on Earth.
Math has been extremely important and innovative, but it never reached its true potential until the invention of zero. Throughout the years, zero has been invented, defined, and discovered several times throughout history. It was first used by the ancient Sumerians around 300 BCE. Then around 200 to 300 CE, the Hindu used zero and assigned it a value. And then finally, the Mayans used zero on 400 CE.
Sure, many people may have used and defined zero, and we still may use it today, but why was it important? Well, to answer this, we have to look back to the people who actually invented zero. The Sumerians may have only used zero as a placeholder, but they needed it to make their number system orderly and understandable. For example, before they developed a symbol for zero, they just left blank spaces, so 608 looked almost identical to 68.
Okay, so using zero as a placeholder makes sense, but why was it turned into a number? This change from a placeholder to a number may not have seemed immense during its time, but today it still carries monumental weight. This new number allowed us to use more complex calculations that can apply to all aspects of life, such as money, astronomy, food, and war. Zero not only allowed us to use calculations in ways that hadn't been seen before, but it also allowed us to use negative numbers because you can't use numbers that are less than nothing if you haven't defined nothing. But who exactly used zero in the first place?
Zero was first used by the Sumerians around 300 BCE, but it was only used as a placeholder. They used a double wedge to signify a zero, but that got pretty confusing because some mathematicians started using a single wedge or another shape for zero. The Mayans also used zero as a placeholder in around 400 CE. They used a shell-like shape for zero, and sometimes they'd use a person's face or another symbol, so that got pretty confusing as well. The Mayans developed a number system separately from the Sumerians, which suggests that the number zero was needed for a functioning civilization. But who was the first to use it as a number and not only a placeholder?
The Hindus are actually credited with using zero. And they think that it was sort of, they would represent numbers by a grid, and if something wasn't in there, it was just like a circle, right? So that's what they did. But there's a temple in Bangalore, India, dated to 570 AD, which talks about how many hectares of flowers need to be planted in order to have flowers for the deity of the temple year-round. And on there, there's clearly a use of zero there. So they think that the use of zero by the Hindus may have been as early as 200, 300 CE.
To get more specific, one of the first well-known people to use zero as a digit was Aryabhata, a Hindu mathematician and astronomer. He used zero in ways that had never been seen before the 5th century. Later, Brahmagupta, another Hindu mathematician and astronomer, used zero as a digit in 628 CE, but he also defined zero and used it in algebraic expressions and astronomical calculations. He developed many ways to use zero that are still used today, such as multiplying by zero. He also defined negative numbers and came up with the different ways to use them in algebraic expressions.
So now we know how zero was invented, but to the real question, why was zero invented? We have a purpose for zero today, but what was its real purpose back when it was invented?
The first use of numbers, for example, people counting, the evidence of that is a bone. There are actually a couple they found, and this thing called the Ashango bone. There are groupings of notches on the bone, with each of them has like 60 notches, and that's a 1-to-1 onto correspondence, which is how we know two sets have the same number of elements. So we represent numbers, right? So humans can do what's called subitizing. So if I get a collection of objects up to about 5 to 7, you can look at that grouping of objects and you know how many there are right off the bat without counting. Once you go beyond that, you got to keep track of things. So what people did, and the Sumerians were the first to actually use symbols to represent numbers, right? Because when you have cities, you're going to need taxes because, you got to run the city. We would put these tokens in these clay purses with the tokens, sort of representing how much money people had. But of course, once you sealed up the clay pouch and it hardened, the only way to find out how much was in there was to break it open. So they started putting symbols on top of the clay purses, and they realized they didn't need the tokens. They could just write things on a clay tablet.
Numbers were needed for trading, to collect taxes, and do many other processes that are essential to a city. When you have numbers, you must also have a way to mark an empty column, and the way the Sumerians did this was by using 0. Later on, the Hindus started needing to use the number not only as a placeholder, but as its own value. This is when the astronomers started writing documents and creating tablets on what 0 was and how to use it in math. Another impact that was felt almost immediately was 0 revolutionized commerce. Now, people could pay in almost exact percentages, and you could loan money from someone. These improvements have continued to today, where people still use credit cards to purchase something with money they don't have, and the price of goods can be calculated to a penny, which is much more exact than a dollar or even a nickel.
Nowadays, math, and 0 in particular, is a universal part of life. But how did it become so widespread? 0, both the concept and the symbol we use today, spread from the Hindu to the Muslim and Arab worlds through trade. They adopted this system because it allowed a person to get infinite precision when computing. 0 may have spread through the Middle East, but it wasn't introduced to the Western world until 1202 through Fibonacci. Even though it made it to Europe in 1202, it wasn't adopted until the Reformation, when loans became popular. People realized they could charge 0.01% in interest using the Hindu system and 0. 0 spread to many different countries and regions throughout history, but when did the symbol used today for 0 become developed? The Sumerians used a double wedge way back when they invented 0, but 0 spread much further than Mesopotamia. The hollow oval shape that is used today originated from the Hindu in India. So the symbol of 0 has been the same since it was used as a number and not only as a placeholder.
0's impacts are still felt in everyday life today. For example, computers use binary, which consists of zeros and ones as bits, and the universal sign for off is 0. Without 0, the Cartesian coordinate system, which is a graphing system taught in all places over the world, would not be possible. This system needs 0 as its starting point, because the origin is 0, 0. Another system based on 0 is calculus, which was created in the 1660s. Calculus requires 0 to function even in its most basic form. Calculus was built off 0, and later on became the foundation for more complex subjects like physics and differential equations. These not only required calculus, but they also needed 0 to function, even if they were just using 0 through calculus. 0 has fundamentally changed the world, and without it, many aspects of life would be lacking.
0 has arguably been the largest turning point in the history of mathematics since the invention of the entire number system. This addition not only revolutionized mathematics, but it also changed the world around us. Through the use of 0, civilization has flourished and technology has advanced in ways that had never been seen before. 0 will continue to send us even farther into the future, and through it, civilization will only grow.